Hi everyone, welcome to John and Tris Chats.
Talking movement and everything around our business performance essentials.
I'm the stupid one, Tris is the clever one, and we're just going to get down to it.
Subscribe and follow.
Let's go for Maybe he missed the joke out.
Did he?
Yeah, he said don't do the joke. So today we're talking about the foot.
Subliminal message there.
We're talking about pronation. Are we talking about pronation?
I think we're going to talk about the big P word.
Penis. Let's do that.
The most misunderstood P word in the movement world.
Mm-hmm.
There's some other really big misunderstood words, but
this
I
is
think
the biggest.
as P words go, I think pronation's the biggest.
There's a common misconception that pronation is a bad thing, or overpronation is a bad thing.
So I guess the first place to start is just to think movement in general. There is a neutral, and then we always have movements either way of that neutral, whether it be flexion, extension, and we need to be able to cycle between the extremes, and we want to sit somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Pronation and supination are no different. Like, yes, we want to access supination, kind of early stance of gait and trying to create power, external rotation based position, but we need that pronation and that internal rotation side. And if pronation is bad, then supination's bad, right? They're two differences, and we need to be able to go in between. But I think where the issue comes is that people actually don't know what pronation is, and they think it's something it's not. What everybody thinks pronation is, I would actually say that's a cause of not being able to pronate. So it's what everybody thinks pronation is the complete opposite of what it is.
Yeah.
What pronation is, as a kind of definition, is we have three arches in our foot: outside, inside, and transverse across. And so it is all three of those arches are getting length in them at the same time. So we're very much so thinking in kind of three-dimension plane, of the three planes of movement, and it's getting length for all three of those arches. The foot's getting longer, we're getting space as the midfoot kind of comes down, we're getting space between all the 33 joints of our foot. And I would actually think about it, yes, there's kind of outside to inside movement with pronation, but I actually explained it today to a client of actually we can respect, we can acknowledge that, but actually thinking of the lengthening of back to front of your foot.
So you said three arches. What do you mean by three arches?
So the arch everybody knows is kind of the medial arch. So yeah, when someone refers to the arch of the foot, that's what we have. We have lateral arch, so the same but just on the outside, less noticeable, but there is an arch. And then the transverse arch, so if you think about kind of the base of your toes and the arch that kind of comes across the foot, that kind of follows kind of perpendicular to the other arches.
Okay.
So really, yeah, hold on to that thought of kind of a wave of lengthening from the back of the foot to the front. Yes, a little bit outside to inside, but just really think about that kind of wave of lengthening through the foot. I think what most people think pronation is just thinking about one plane of movement, sideways movement, and just kind of collapsing from the outside straight in onto the inside. And instead of that kind of lengthening going through the foot, we've just got a kind of a calcaneus that just dumps out to the side, and the whole weight comes on the inside of the foot very early on in the gait cycle.
Yeah.
What people think overpronation is, I would actually say, is kind of isolated calcaneus E version, so tips out to the side and everything comes in. My view would be that the reason that's happening, and the reason they're having to excessively kind of evert their calcaneus and everything's coming in, is because they can't tilt their calcaneus. So your heel bone, when you land, should be facing from the heel, kind of pointing upwards, and then as you put weight for it, should flatten, and you should get that wave along it, and it should flatten as your knee kind of travels forward in that kind of pronation dorsiflexion position.
Yeah.
And if you can't flatten that heel, kind of going back to front, kind of the backside forwards, then the place you're going to go is you're going to tip in and you're going to evert.
So if you can't flatten it,
yeah.
What are you doing? Is it staying elevated?
So we stay elevated, but
is that a joint restriction?
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Limited by what? Muscular limitation?
Unlikely. Normally, there'll probably be some soft tissue adaptations, but it's more likely kind of movement patterns, movement behaviours, the nervous system giving access.
Or not giving access.
Or not giving access. Really commonplace that the nervous system will just shut off access to after kind of going over on your ankle and those kind of things. So unless you reintroduce it you'll just lock up there and it'll protect that area.
Yeah, okay. You trying really hard not to pick that up.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's worth it.
Do you
maybe
think?
Just a little bit.
Okay. So just to explain that a little bit better. So give me a hand. Give me a hand. This is the floor. So if we have the heel bone here, in an ideal world, as you put weight through the heel, it should flatten, and then your midfoot can come down.
On mid stance, it flattens.
No, as you heel strike, you'll put weight through. Well, between early stance and mid stance, you put weight through, we get flattening, and you can kind of wave forward. If you think about that, what I would say is, if you cannot get this calcaneal heel bone movement, the only option you normally have to go is this for to tilt out to the side, so up that way, and then you get this dumping in. That's really early coming into the inside of your foot.
That's sort of path of least resistance.
Exactly. That could have been better. And so the reason people overpronate is because they can't actually do one of the essential things to pronate and kind of summate that lengthening through their foot.
Yeah, okay, so what would you recommend for somebody who knows that's their limitation?
So you need to get comfortable at spending time with weight through your heel. And I always talk about this time kind of like delaying pronation, but what I mean by that is you need to spend time with weight going through your heel to delay that transition of weight through your foot or outside to inside, because you can only travel forward in your foot if that heel bone flattens to then let the foot open up and the tibia to move forward. We don't have a conscious control. We don't like contract a muscle for that to happen. It happens when you have gravity and your weight going through it for a long enough time.
Yeah, I think that some of the exercises that we have in our programme, they're much more effective if you shift your weight onto the heel as well. Is there a link between having weight on the heel while you're training and then also helping with getting comfortable with your weight on your heel and the pronation aspect?
Yeah, all linked. Yeah, absolutely. So I think especially if we think about runners especially when they kind of forefoot strike as well, is like they, not necessarily a bad thing, and I actually think it's a really good thing for performance, but they almost miss that early stage of kind of getting weight through their heel. And that's kind of similar if someone has a really shifted forward kind of centre of mass, is almost the same thing. They are missing that heel strike and that flattening of the bone, and actually they think at the end, potentially if they're thinking more in terms of like dorsiflexion, that they're blocked at the end of dorsiflexion, they stretch and stretch at the end of dorsiflexion, but they're doing the second half of dorsiflexion or pronation well, they've just completely skipped past the first part of it. And so if someone presents like this and they're really struggling to mobilise that kind of heel bone in the sagittal plane, really easy thing you can do is just bring their centre of mass backwards by using things like slant boards. But I think it's really funny because there seems to be a real kind of pride's at stake. I think when people use like slant boards and stuff in the gym, they think like, I can't do things.
Squat.
I can't properly squat. Everybody's looking at me and I'm an idiot and
have to wedge my heel.
Yeah.
But do you not? To me, using a slant board, you're naturally going to have your weight shifting further forward, right?
So this is the big difference. No, so it should bring you back if done well when your pelvis and rib cage in a position. It should keep you above your heel. But this is the big difference. Everybody thinks putting your foot on a slant board is the same as just putting like a textbook or weights under your heels. Two very different things. If you put a heel on a weight, it will shift you down onto your toes.
Yeah, big time.
If you use a slant board, you should be able to stay well stacked over your heels.
Why is that? As long as it's a progressive slant board, not an aggressive slant board, because an aggressive slant board, it's just going to be like having a wedge, right? Because of the angle of it, you want a steady wedge.
I mean, it's for a few different reasons. So even if you're setting up on a slant board, you're still going to do a movement that you want to come into pronation, you just want to delay it. So I mean, the first thing is if you just chuck a something of height, a bumper plate or something under your heel, you're going to have heel contact and you're going to have kind of toe contact. You're not going to have any midfoot contact at all in between there. And you need that sensory input to kind of relax those joints and kind of open up and come into that dorsiflexion. So if you just have contact on that heel and those toes, as you come down and you try and come down into the bottom of the squat, which is an internal rotation position or pronation, your foot's not getting that sensory feedback to kind of relax and open up those arches. Pronation is an internal rotation position, so we see it all up the chain. It should be internally rotating together. So in mid stance, we should see internal rotation at the hip, the tibia, and then into the actual pronation as well.
How often do you see people who don't have any internal rotation throughout, or have very limited internal rotation throughout their movement?
Yeah.
And then how often do you see the opposite? Loads of internal rotation, very limited external.
Yeah. You very, very rarely see someone with really good internal rotation at the foot. Well, I don't, because they're in my, they're in clients of mine. I'd say there's two big ways of reacting to not being able to pronate the foot. And one is, like we've talked about, this kind of overpronation and that compensation of not lengthening through your foot and just going outside to inside. And then the other big way is just having really stiff high arches and your whole body just staying in external rotation.
Yeah, okay.
So I think they're the two biggest presentations of how people get around not having an internal rotation. But everybody needs to generate, whether it's like ideal internal rotation or a compensation of internal rotation, everyone's body needs to get some sort of ugly or good looking internal rotation, because that's how you create length in a tissue that's then going to contract to pull you forward. So you can also think about internal rotation as putting length into a tissue.
Yeah.
And if a tissue doesn't get length into it, it can't contract to shorten.
But is there not a danger that you could go too far? You go too far one way, then the muscle's going to lengthen, but then not have the strength to pull you back. Would that ever happen? Or is it just the fact that you're going to have movement patterns that are incorrect?
So I would always refer to that as like a yielding stiffness kind of continuum. I think that's the kind of thing you're referring to. So as a muscle lengthens, if it's getting load through and it eccentrically lengthens, we're absorbing force, or we call that yielding. And on the other side of it, if you put force through a tendon and it doesn't lengthen, that's kind of what we've called stiffness. I think the physicists would probably blow my head off if I was saying that's the definition of stiffness, but something not changing in length when we put load for it, or relatively little change. Yeah. And they're two ends of a continuum. Like everything, at sometimes we want to be able to really go into a really lengthened position and really access loads of yielding to really absorb force. So I think an example there would be if you jumped off a 20-foot wall and you're going to land, you wouldn't want to land with rigid, stiff knees. You'd want to ride it all the way down to shock absorb it as much as you possibly can to kind of protect yourself, right? And that's one extreme of yielding, and then the other side of stiffness is if you came down and you just didn't bend your knees at all, you would probably break your legs and everything in them. So there's different characteristics of where you want to be on that continuum.
With that example though, you want to evidently be one end
on the yielding,
where is an example? What's an example of when you want to be on the
other side? So the other side of the stiffness, essentially think. I never think it's going to be ideal to be 100% stiff, but I think closer than neutral towards the stiffness. Think kind of power, like 100 meter sprinter.
Yeah.
So they want to stay relatively stiff. They want to stay relatively kind of toned with contraction and like in an external rotation contracted position. They will need to come into slight internal rotation to be able to keep on contracting. But anything really powerful and short, you probably want to be more on the stiffness side of the continuum.
Can you be on the stiffness side of the continuum even though you're moving through range? So let's talk about Olympic lifter.
Right.
It's crazy flexible in the shoulders, flexible in the ankles, flexible in the hips to get those positions.
Yeah.
But they also probably need to be quite stiff to then lock out, right? So they're going from one end of the spectrum to the other.
Massively. And yeah, really good example of how they want both sides of that. So think of it like kind of clean and jerk. When you catch at the bottom, the deeper you come into that kind of squat to catch it, is they're going to go through that kind of yielding process and shock absorb through their knees and the front of their knees, which is ideal because it means they have to have less. They have to chuck it at less heights. They're more likely to be successful. If you do that and you're like arse to grass, then you're going to have a really hard task standing from there. And so if you can have a little bit of stiffness and catch it at 90 degrees, so yield a little bit of stiffness to pop up, that's, you know, getting that kind of happy medium between the two. But one's not bad, one's not good. Just different drinks, different needs.
Or let's say you're doing a snatch and you're catching it right at the bottom. If you yield too much, then you're in danger of completely fucking yourself. Right?
Well, exactly. I mean, there is that the whole time you're yielding, you are taking on force. And tendons take the brunt of force. And so if you've got 200 kegs sitting on this bar and you're yielding for such a long time, you're getting more force, you know, you are an increased chance of all of that force accumulating to something breaking. And that's why plyometrics are a good tool to have in your arsenal, because essentially when you want to, you're creating stiffness to kind of transmit that force elsewhere. So you are, rather than locally kind of accepting all that force like you would if a tendon really lengthens and it yields, you're taking a little bit, passing the rest up the chain.
Well, you're trying to encourage people, or at least comfort people, that pronation is okay. So then, going back to the previous point about getting comfortable with having your weight through your heel, what would you recommend? What sort of exercises would you recommend for?
So I think with this you can modify pretty much any lower limb exercise you're going to do to spend more time in your heel. So slant boards are brilliant. You can use them for kind of lunges, squats, anything that's not dynamic where your feet are fixed. The other really important thing is to start with your shin angle behind your heel. I think a lot of people kind of land or do an exercise and they already start in some sort of kind of dorsiflexion with their like a positive shin angle, so their tibia coming down. And once you're that far through, you've bypassed your heel. And so I think a lunge would be a really good example for that. If you're starting with your knee directly above or in front of your ankle, you're already starting the position in a positive shin angle. You've got no chance of putting any weight down through the heel. Your tibia needs to be angled back behind the heel. So if you start an exercise here, your centre of mass is ready too far forward to get through the heel and cause that kind of movement. You need to be starting with a negative shin angle to get that weight down through the heel.
For sure.
Grab a cuppa and a pew.
So threaded.